The Capitals season is over.
Your Locked On Capitals, your daily podcast on the Washington Capitals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Well, hello and welcome into this edition of Locked On Capitals. I'm so glad you decided to join me today. As always, this podcast is free and available on all the major platforms. And I want to thank you for making this your first listen or view of the day. Yes, this podcast is also available in video form, so head on over to YouTube and check it out. My name is Dan Holme. You can find me on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Locked On Caps. So in this edition of Locked On Capitals, we talk about the Caps regular season comes to an end. Finally, we can put to rest this kind of ill-fated season. Then later in the show, we will talk about, it was a standout night for a few different players. Craig Smith gets his 200th career goal, and Tom Wilson and Dylan Strome continue to destroy. But just to get it going here, the Capital season, this game in particular kind of epitomized the entire season. The Caps were up 4-1. And they found a way to lose this game in overtime. What kind of, almost a proper ending to this season. I hate to say it. And kind of the interesting things that I were hearing out there is whatever you do, Capitals, at this point, don't win. It's just going to screw up the draft and what the potential is there. And just to cover on that really quickly, the Caps have secured the 8th best odds in the draft lottery, a stacked class headlined by Canadian phenom Connor Bedard. Washington will have a 6% chance at the number 1 pick, writes Matt Wyrick of NBC Sports Washington. So you're telling me there's a chance? I'm telling you there's a chance that Connor Bedard could potentially, it's a Hail Mary pass, but there's a chance that Connor Bedard could be a Washington Capital. Wouldn't that just, rock the Capitals world? It's kind of exciting to think about, but just talking about the game tonight, and it was one of the games that, the Al Koken was talking to Alex Ovechkin, and he was like, well, why did you come back and play? And he said he did it for the fans, and that was a nice tip of the hat for Alex Ovechkin. Let's face it, he didn't have to come out there and play. He could have easily just said that nagging injury that he had, was just bugging him, and he could have just sailed off into the summer, but it wasn't the case. Just a really strong effort, at least I would say, in the first 2 periods. And then it was in the third period, old ghosts came back to haunt this team as they failed to win and failed to complete an entire game, playing all 3 periods. And it was the Hughes brothers that came to haunt the Washington Capitals. Just a really interesting game out there. And if you take a look at the New Jersey Devils and who they are now, is quite remarkable if you think about it. Just thinking back, a few years, how quite deplorable they were. So, I think that team is headed in the right direction, and it is going to be an interesting playoff push there in the Metro Division. But looking at the game in particular, like I talked about, for the first 2 periods, it was the Capitals game, and I was a little bit late to watching the game, putting the kids to bed, that kind of thing, and I turned it on, and I couldn't believe my eyes. The Caps were up 4-1 against the surging New Jersey Devils. And part of me was thinking to myself, where was this compete level the entire season? And then all of a sudden, it just kind of went back to how the rest of the season was. They tied the game, and then subsequently, the New Jersey Devils won the game in overtime. So the New Jersey Devils scored twice over the final 20 minutes to erase a 2-goal Capitals lead and force overtime. And with just 26 seconds remaining in the extra frame, 19-year-old rookie Luke Hughes beat Capitals goaltender Darcy Kuemper for the game winner on a wraparound, his first NHL goal to give the Devils a 5-4 victory. And of course, I don't like, the fact that the Caps lost the game. Ultimately, it doesn't really matter if they won or lost. In a lot of ways, it's better that they did lose because, it gave them somewhat better of an option in the draft. I don't know how much it's going to help them, but, on paper, it appears that it helped a little bit, but then they ended up getting a point because it went to overtime. The whole thing is just kind of crazy to me, but Good. I know this is a crazy thing to say because he's not a Capitals player, but good for the young Hughes guy there in New Jersey. Him and his brother are just destroying it out there. So good on that team, and good for those two young brothers that are really kind of coming into their own in the National Hockey League. So it was not the Capitals' night, that is for sure. The Caps' regular season finale started promising for the home side. Just 4:36 into the opening period, Joe Snively sniped one from the right circle past Devils goaltender Mackenzie Blackwood to give Washington a 1-0 lead. The Caps doubled their lead over 2 minutes later when Nick Backstrom assisted Rasmus Sandin on a one-timer from a low slot. So they were getting that push. They were getting that compete out there. They just weren't able to find a way to finish. And I think also to a certain extent that the Devils were kind of disengaged the first couple periods, and then all of a sudden they just are like, we're going to lose this game against a Capitals team that is the worst Caps team in quite some time. We've got to figure it out. We have a young up and coming team. We're going to lose to this old Caps team that has no plans, or they're not poised, and they're not going to be in the playoffs. We've got to find a way to win. And they really started to apply the pressure. You saw emotions boil over a little bit. And, it was a tough game to watch, all things considered. And then just kind of your hopes for what's coming up in the years to come. But that's what we're hoping for, is bigger and better things. And I'll talk about that a little bit later in the show here as well. The momentum continued to build for the home side midway through the third period when Dallas star Jack Hughes made an errant pass deep in the defensive zone that landed on the stick of Capitals winger Craig Smith in a prime scoring opportunity. After corralling the puck, Smith wristed it in the top right corner of the net over Blackwood's glove to extend Washington's lead to 3. The score was also a special one for Smith, as I'll talk about a little bit later. It marked his 200th career NHL goal. So Craig Smith, who came to this team, primarily because they didn't see a future for him in Boston, and they were actively shopping him before the trade deadline. And then we know Orlov and Hathaway went out to Boston, and it's my belief that the GM in Boston said, if you're going to get these draft picks, you got to take Craig Smith with you. And that's what happened. And, all things considered, Craig Smith has played pretty well for the Capitals. I don't know if I would plan on bringing him back. It's my belief that he probably is playing, or he played his last game with the Capitals jersey on tonight. So a lot of questions, not just for the Capitals, but, the organization, but also for the players in general, the guys that, potentially might be looking for a new job. See Anthony Mantha, see, Protas, or, Kuznetsov and Irwin and all these UFAs that are out there. I know that Kuznetsov's not, but if you can recall back to when he's saying that he wanted out of DC. So it is going to be some interesting days that lie ahead for the Caps as they try to kind of position themselves to be competitive. And one of the things that I was watching after the game was Joe Beninati, and he's usually the most, silky smooth speaker out there. He never says anything too outrageous, and he didn't really tonight either, but he said that he expects this team to make some big changes. I'm paraphrasing here, and that he expects them to be competitive next year. So he didn't, give his normal, this team's good and they'll come back in the fall and, they'll be in the playoffs. No, Joe Beninati and Craig Laughlin both said that they see changes coming on this team. And we know that there's not a lot of open positions on the team. So that means trades are possible, right? So that means that you could see some of these bigger players that I've spoke of on this show, other than the untouchables. I'm talking about Oshie and Backstrom and those kind of players. There is the possibility, and I hear a lot of things from people, there's no way they're moving on from Backstrom or Oshie, and that very well might be, but it's just my belief that they should pick up the phone and listen. What is the offer that you're going to give me? Because, kind of to their point, what Joby and Locke were talking about is this team has got to be competitive. I don't think the DC fan base really has a stomach for lackluster hockey, and that is what we saw this past season. It is, and to be fair, they rolled down the statistics of that Tom Wilson and Nick Backstrom and John Carlson hadn't played all three together until almost the end of the season. So I understand that injuries played a key role in the Capitals' lack of success this year. I get all that, but one of the things you hear is you can't use injury as an excuse because there's injuries everywhere around the NHL. I think there's a whole lot more than that, and it's going to be interesting after breakdown day. After they listen to the players, and then what ultimately is the future of Peter Laviolette? Will he be behind the bench next season? So many questions abound on this team. It is going to be interesting. All right, so after the break here, we're going to talk about the game. It wasn't all doom and gloom. There were some highlights. What were those highlights? We'll talk about it straight ahead. For a championship team, it's all about making sure every player is a perfect fit. It's the same when it comes to your vehicle. Every part needs to fit just right. So the next time you need parts and accessories, head to eBay Motors. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, you'll be sure every part you need fits right the first time. Just add your ride to My Garage and look for the green check to know if the part will fit or your money back. Because just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game when you shop on eBay Motors. And with over 122 million parts to choose from, you'll be back in the game in no time. After all, it's easy to bring home a win when the right parts are guaranteed. Get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. Eligible items, exclusions apply. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So just to talk about what's coming up on the show in the off season, I have Roman Stubbs will be on the show next week as we do a breakdown on this team. What went right, what went wrong, and then the same goes. I'll have Mike Vogel in here and John Walton at some point within the next couple of weeks, and we'll talk about what their thoughts are on this team. So you'll want to make sure and hit the subscribe or follow button. There are some big shows coming in the next few weeks. But back to the game tonight. It wasn't all doom and gloom. There were some bright spots in there. And, when you take a look at it, that's what you got to look for, because we knew going into the game tonight, it really didn't mean anything. Maybe draft placing a little bit, maybe trying to play spoiler a little bit, but ultimately nothing. There was no chance they were going to make it to the playoffs if they won the game tonight. So an interesting thing for sure. Craig Smith gets his 200th career goal with his team already up 2-1. Thanks to Joe Snively and Rasmus Sandin, Craig Smith found himself with a lot of open ice in the offensive zone and Jack Hughes with the puck. So he decided to run a little experiment and call for the puck. Figured I'd give him a holler and see if he'd throw it over. He grinned on the broadcast. It worked, as Hughes mistook him for a teammate and threw a perfect tape-to-tape pass to Smith in the slot. Smith made no mistake, sniping home his 9th of the season. It marked Smith's 200th career goal, and he grabbed his year and 2 goals of his final 3 games in DC, writes the Hockey News. So a good night for Craig Smith. And, good for him. I mean, he's earned it. I mean, just your Joe average hockey player isn't necessarily going to score 200 goals. And he's still got some hockey left to play in front of him. So, hats go off to him for, a great season and a great career so far. The other players that kind of jump out off the page is Tom Wilson. And, it's my belief that one of the players that the Caps have missed the most this past season is Tom Wilson. He brings physicality, he brings leadership, he brings goal scoring. So for the Caps to have been without him for a lion's share of the season definitely had an impact. Same goes for Dylan Strome. Had a career year here in Washington, and it's interesting, when he signed here, they gave him pretty much a prove me contract. Prove to the Caps that you're worth a contract, and subsequently he did prove himself, and that is why he got the extension. And the Chicago Blackhawks loss is the Washington Capitals gain. Not only did everyone contribute to the Caps' success on Thursday, but Tom Wilson and Dylan Strome delivered once again. Wilson struck in the second to restore the 3-goal lead for his team with his 13th of the season. He finished the campaign on a 4-game goal streak. Meanwhile, Strome assisted on the tally, making it 6 consecutive games with a point. So there are some bright spots on this team and some players that will be instrumental in years to come. when I listed my three untouchables, of course, I didn't think the rest of the team was going to depart. But, Dylan Strome has definitely been one of those bright pieces that was brought into this team. And, the good thing for him is that he's played an entire season without being injured. He was a healthy scratch one time, but the durability and just the leadership that he has there. He also won an award that I saw Ben Raby hand out to him. The name of the award escapes me now, but it was essentially just for being the most accessible to the media. He always made himself available to anyone that wanted to talk to any media member. So that goes a long ways with, different beat writers and that kind of thing where, if you're looking for a good story, there's some players out there that aren't very approachable. Let's just say that. So for him to be, approachable and do that, that was a big thing for Dylan Strome and also for the Capitals because it helps, build rapport with the beat writers that cover this team, and it's also just speaks well for him as a person. Like I said, there's some players out there that are a little bit standoffish. So to have a player like him on the bench playing on this team is really just a good thing. So building blocks for this team going forward. Like I said, it's going to be interesting after breakdown day when they kind of just go player by player by player and hear what their thoughts were on the season and what their long-term projections are, and I'll go over those in depth in the days and weeks to come, because the one thing, and I'll talk about this in the final segment, I have a long list of thank yous and everything, and you guys for following me all season long, but is just to listen to the players. Let's listen to Alex Ovechkin and hear what he thought went right and what went wrong. And same goes around the whole locker room. Darcy Kuemper and Nick Backstrom and just these key pieces in this Capitals team. Let's hear what they have to say and what do they perceive went right and wrong. And, I was listening to NHL Network Radio, and the interesting they were saying about up in Calgary is it's going to be interesting what is going to happen with the head coach in Calgary after breakdown day, because they put a lot of stock into the players and what they have to say about the head coach. And it's kind of a tough position for the head coach to be in because, say for you ruffle a bunch of players' feathers and they don't like you, then they're probably going to say it, and it could spell the end of your career on that particular team. Is that the case in Washington? Do you think the players like Peter Laviolette, do you think there was a chemistry? I never really sensed any unease. I didn't sense any tension between the players and the coach. And one of the things that I like about Peter Laviolette as well, just kind of talking about the team and the coach here, is just the fact that he was very business oriented. The press and the beat writers really kind of pushed him today. They asked him about his future. Do they see him coming back to Washington, or do you see yourself moving on to another team? And he said, I have to worry about a hockey game. I have to worry about a hockey game, the last game of the season that has little importance. A lot of respect goes out to Peter Laviolette. He could have used this opportunity to, give a last jab to the Capitals, like, well, see ya, suckers, I'm on to the next one. You wouldn't say that, but you know what I'm talking about. Sometimes, if a coach knows they're a lame duck coach, they'll just kind of, they know they're done, so they're just going to kind of get a dig in there. I ultimately am not sure, and like Tarek El-Bashir said, it's almost a 50-50 thing that if Peter Laviolette comes back to this team or not. I think that, for me, give him another opportunity with a healthy team and some positive additions to this team, and then judge and see what he has in the tank, because it's really hard to judge him. He did the best with what he had, but we're hoping for bigger and better things. And if the Capitals do happen to move on from head coach Peter Laviolette, I hope they pick a coach that is more oriented towards younger players and working them guys into the lineup, because the one thing you noticed in the game tonight is the young players in New Jersey. They played a huge role on that Devils team. You take a look at the Hughes brothers, and that's just the two off the top of my head. There are some young players, but there's also some experience, sprinkled in there as well with Hamilton and that kind of thing. Siegenthaler, if that you guys remember him playing on the Caps as well. So some interesting days lie ahead for the Caps, that is for sure. All right, so after the break here, we are going to talk about the backup goalie in this game. It seems to me like I was talking to you guys about an unrecognizable goalie. Well, tonight is no exception. as there was an unexpected a guy that signed an amateur tryout in the form of Reid Cooper. We'll talk about that, and then we'll talk about what is next for Locked On Capitals. We'll talk about that straight ahead. All right, welcome back into this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So I was talking to you guys, I would say it was, I don't know, about a week or so ago about Mitchell Gibson and how he was going to be the backup goalie in the game, because we know that there's, little implications. We know Hershey is, making their push for the Calder Cup playoffs here. And I think that ultimately they didn't want to call up a Fucale or a Shepherd for a Caps team that really has no plans for going to the postseason. At the time, like tonight, there was 0.00% chance they were going to go to the playoffs. So what did they do? They signed Reid Cooper to an amateur tryout. And it's an interesting thing what he was doing there. Cooper had never heard from Brooks, though once he had heard his name and who he was calling with, he knew who he was coming. He had seen it on TV, these final games, goaltenders coming up to the NHL on amateur tryouts, and now it's Cooper's turn as he'll be Darcy Kuemper's second chair in the Capitals season finale against the New Jersey Devils, with Charlie Lindgren out with an injury, writes the Hockey News. I hopped right off the couch and went from there. Cooper said, nothing. I saw it happening with Toronto there, and I guess the same thing happened with the Caps. I saw Lindgren went down against Boston, and then I got a call. I mean, you see it happen every once in a while, and you see how lucky those guys are, and think it's just kind of happened to me. He added, just really thankful. Can't thank the Caps enough for this opportunity. The 24-year-old played 27 games with the NCAA's Division III Curry College this season, going 26-1 with a .935 save percentage. He also played 3 years at Robert Morris University. His phone had been blowing up from his D3 netminder to an NHL backup in a span of under 48 hours. And while he's grateful for the opportunity, he also hopes it's a sign of things to come in regard to his career. My dream has always been to play in the NHL. I guess we'll go from here. This is obviously a great opportunity, but we'll see what happens throughout the summer. So, he didn't get his opportunity as Darcy Kuemper completed the game. But it's one of those cool stories to hear. In this case, there was a guy that was signed to an amateur trial, or the one game that you saw, like the Zamboni driver, had to finish the game because both netminders were injured. So some unique opportunities and a good story for him, regardless of if he ever makes it to the NHL with any type of substantial contract. Still a cool moment. Cooper wore 97 for DC. First joined the team for the first time for a Thursday morning skate. It involved a lot of handshakes and nerves, though fellow Saskatoon native and longtime friend Darcy Kuemper helped calm him down as he strapped on his Curry College color pads. While soaking in his first NHL practice, he got a full Capitals experience. After all, the first shot he faced was from no other than Alex Ovechkin. I wanted to go as hard as I could, Cooper laughed. I stopped it, cuff of my glove. So that is going to be something that he'll stick with him forever, regardless if he, like I say, has long-term goals or he ends up making it to the NHL, signing with an NHL team. I guess that remains to be seen, but you got to think for these guys that have played hockey their entire life, that to get the opportunity, even in a backup role, even if you don't get any time, but just to be, it's like a culmination of a life's work, going through grade school and high school and then college and getting an opportunity to even play backup to someone like Darcy Kuemper for the Washington Capitals with Alex Ovechkin. It had to be just a crazy night for him and a really special one that I'm sure he'll never forget. As far as the future with Locked On Capitals is concerned, we will continue shows 5 nights a week through the off season. So that will be through the entire off season. There is 2 months in the middle of summer where it's 3 shows a week, but for the foreseeable future, it will be shows 5 days a week. So we will do player breakdowns. We're going to talk about potential, players coming to this team. We'll talk about, the playoffs in general. Obviously, we know the Capitals aren't involved, but I'll talk about the teams that are playing, most notably in the Metropolitan Division. I'll also do my best to cover the Hershey Bears and the Carolina Stingrays as they're pushing for the Calder Cup and the Kelly Cup. So there is going to still be Washington Capitals hockey going on all the time throughout the entire summer, 5 days a week, except for, like I said, there's 2 months in the middle of summer where there's 3 shows. But other than that, you're going to have Capitals hockey all the time here on Locked On Capitals. So make sure and hit that follow or subscribe button. That way you'll know when the new shows are out. Like I said, big shows coming up. I have Roman Stubbs from the Washington Post. I have Mike Vogel from WashingtonCaps.com. I have John Walton, of course, the voice of your Capitals on the radio side, and also the host of Caps This Morning. So there is going to be a lot of really great content that I don't want you guys to miss out on. So hit that subscribe button also on YouTube so you can watch the videos. It's going to be the most exciting. And I have a long list of players, beat writers and broadcasters that have been on this show this last season. There's way too many to mention, but there's been, everyone from, Beninati to, big beat writers like Matt Wyrick. And again, I'm not going to go on and list them all, but if I have to list one person in particular, I do have to mention Matt Wyrick, as he has been on this show every other week pretty much through the entire season. So, most respect. And, I'm most grateful for Matt Wyrick from NBC Sports Washington for joining me every other week. A true NHL insider, a guy that's at the practices, a guy that's at the games, just a real inside source that has been most beneficial for me. And I hope for you guys that are listening and watching to this as well. We hope to have kind of the same thing going on next season as well. We will also do a season wrap up with Matt Wyrick as well. I also plan on having him on around free agency in July. So we have some true insiders from the Capitals that will be on this show, and it's going to be the most exciting. Thank you for making Locked On Capitals your first listen every day. Every dayers. Tomorrow on the show, we are going to talk about, and this isn't going to be tomorrow, but it will be on Monday's show. We will talk about the Caps. We'll talk about what the players had to say about the season, what went right, what went wrong, and what do they think the future is for this team. All right, once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of Locked On Capitals, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Dan Holme, and I'll talk to you again next time.